Alright, so this is kind of step one in getting these plates back on. This JB weld has been setting up for like 12 hours or something, so it's definitely stiff. And it's definitely enough to where if you wanted to start the second plate, you could do that. But it really takes a good 24 hours to cure, but you can already pull on that. Not that you would want to like hit it with a hammer quite yet, but I'm sure once it's fully set up, you could do that. So obviously it just looks like concrete kind of spackled on there, and that's because it's, this is aluminum shavings, and this just gives you an idea. This is just some of the amount that came off of this job. And, basically what you're focused on with this first step, obviously notice how the whole perimeter has been prepped with just like a carbide burr to make sure it's like nice and rough with kind of like micro dimples, so that the epoxy can grab onto it. Obviously you see I've done the sides up here like basically completely, and then a couple spots here. I'm a little worried about the size of these gaps when it comes to using the actual weld and starting to tack. We'll have to see how that fills in with a 30 thousandths wire. But I don't know how well you'll be able to see. Of course, my white balance is going crazy, but so basically you push that in, make sure this is about the same thickness of the plate, just so you have a good foundation sandwiched between the aluminum, because you only get the one shot at that. Obviously right now at this point you couldn't push that in any further. So the first thing, and I didn't have a popsicle stick, I just had this plastic fork, and I was kind of pushing it in, and then I would look on the inside, make sure nothing was coming over. I think at one point this pushed a little far in, but I was able to reach in. So the nice thing about these big throttle bodies is if you really have to get in there, and like wipe something away, or notice how, just because of the nature of it, especially mixed with aluminum shavings, and depending on, how much hardener you've put in, it's supposed to be a 1-to-1 mix, but that's never always perfect. But you'll get these little bumps. So if you take like a pry bar or something, you could stick this, on the inside through the throttle body seam and just knock anything loose away just to be safe. Other than that, like I said, I think if you did this whole thing this way, I mean, obviously that's a lot of epoxy that you'd have to get. Like I use, what are these? The 5-ounce ones that you get in the professional kit. And that used a fair amount. But I would say you'd probably need a couple of those kits to do it completely. But the other thing with that is, obviously this isn't cleaned up, but don't worry about making a mess. Like I said, just make sure that you're pushing it into the gaps if you're doing it this way. And don't worry about the top. You can always sand down high spots for looks, but the other thing is to be able to make a bridge with it. So that's why this is shaved up far, and I could have even gone a little farther, but for the final amount, you want to build up a little bit more and make sure there's a bridge connected to the epoxy, so that way it has strength. Which, not that I think this would implode inward, 28 inches of vacuum, is not a ton of pressure. You could still probably run forced induction on a setup like this. But like I said, I'm still going to be tacking actual welding wire just to be safe, because that's obviously a higher tensile strength. The only thing I worry about with doing it this way, because obviously my original plan, I could have done it backwards. You could duct tape, put on a few welding tacks, but I didn't like the idea of it dangling there loose. I like the idea of this being solid so that I can really focus the gun where I need it to be and make sure nothing's getting in there. Obviously, the only thing to worry about is if any spatter or slag is coming through. But again, I feel like with the pry bar, if you went in there, you're going to knock away anything that would come loose under engine vacuum anyway. But this now, like I said, set up for 12 hours, I could already duct tape this on there, so it's not like you have to wait a full day. But then I'd probably wait 24 hours before doing any welding. The other thing I was a little concerned with is obviously temperature. I think that a regular JB weld will take 500 degrees, but intermittently. I don't know if it says it on here. Because obviously there's like high heat ones that can take, full blown 500 or up to 1,000 intermittent. Extreme heat, they changed. It used to say 2,400 degrees, but that was intermittent, so now it just says like 1,200 consistent. But if you're doing it how you do sheet metal, where you're stitching and doing attack, letting it cool, then coming back to each spot, I think that's how I'm going to end up doing it. And even if the welds aren't airtight, I'm going to be epoxying over that anyway to make sure they are. And the welds, it's not so much about it being airtight or running like a really perfect bead. Because again, I'm running a flux core without gas, so I know that's not going to be perfect, at least for the PSI potential of what the weld could do. You would need a shielding gas for that, like argon, or actually I don't even know what aluminum. I think it's argon. Could be wrong. I'm not a welder really. Like I do weld, but not a professional. But this, I think, though, is a really smart way of doing this. Just like I said, like having it upside down with the duct tape. This mostly came out level. It's maybe just from gravity sitting overnight. This maybe came out a little bit, and it's not totally flush. Does that matter? Not at all. If anything, you could expand the area of the plenum and actually bring this out a bit if you really wanted to be a little custom. But as I said, I'm confident that if you did this whole thing this way, like if you don't weld at all, but you were bold enough to do this and cut it open and poured it, that's, I guess that's your prerogative. Like, I've never done this, but I'm pretty confident because we do epoxy welding. And there's professionals that do epoxy or porting, not welding, where, we open the intake manifold up enough to where there's holes and we fill those holes in. So obviously this is a huge piece, but again, I feel, if you really think about it, you're only filling in like an 1/8 inch gap. So it's not like the size of the hole or what it's holding is that large. So the percentage of epoxy to what gap it's actually holding. And this aluminum, these plates are not very heavy. I mean, this is maybe like 1/4 pound. So, and epoxy, it's rated at about 3,500 pounds. And I've seen people do lateral tests where they will weld two things and then put weights on the bottom of it just to see how it is as a kind of a glue. But yeah, we'll see, because I don't really know how well that welding setup's gonna work. So the thing is, if I have to do it all this way, I have to do it all that way. I'd have to buy more JB Weld. But the only other thing to think about is this is obviously an excellent point for your ground. The only thing is once you have this set up, or both plates, is these are floating. So there's no conductivity, there's no current allowed to weld. So you're gonna have to start on the body side, whichever side it is, and then build up from there, and then make contact with your puddle to this point. Then this can conduct electricity. Same with the bottom, or then like points in between. So that's something to keep in mind when you're getting an arc off your gun, is make sure you start on the body side and not the plate, or else you're probably going to incidentally hit that because it's so close and not even realize it. But just keep in mind that at this point, there's no conductivity. This is just floating in space, basically hooked up by basically plastic. But and then, obviously it looks rough right now. I'm sure I'll clean this up. And like I said, there's going to be high spots all around. On the gap, just make sure it's nice and strong, and then I'll sand it and make it nice and neat. And then depending on the weather, put more high heat paint on there, and that'll help seal the epoxy as well. But and the thing is, there's only really air and whatever humidity coming through. JB Weld, like certain versions of it, there's different high heats that are like oil resistant, so I've had to use that in certain areas. But you know, this isn't seeing any fuel, no oil. Well, it's technically seeing EGR gases, so that's the only thing. And speaking of which, actually, here's a thought I had. I think I'm gonna throw some Seal on these plugs. Like, I don't know, it's kind of an afterthought, but that's something else. If you need to get to any little thing, that's the nice thing about having two plates, is you can do maybe last minute stuff if you want to get to this bank or something. But so what else? I mean, I think that's about it. I was maybe gonna clean up this throttle body tunnel, check any blending, because that's the thing, is you could still blow this thing out a little more. So even if you did want to like get any more shavings in there, and actually when I first ever ported this, I actually just ran water through it because it's aluminum, so that's how I got rid of any shavings and stuff. Oh, but what I was gonna say, you might notice in one of the videos where I'm looking at this for the last time where it's open, is there's still like spots of carbon here and there in the tunnels, and I got to what I could get to. Some stuff is not accessible, and I'm just rushing to get this done. It doesn't matter because it's going to get dirty anyway, especially if I'm still running EGR. So it's, you know, when it comes down to getting it done, like, there's times where I've taken the time to like make stuff look nice and neat, but it really doesn't matter. So any little spots that you still have, like, don't waste your time. Like, don't waste like 2 hours trying to get every spec, because it's, after a few hundred miles of running with EGR, like, it's gonna start to blacken up in there anyway. So anyway, I've talked way too long about this, but again, this was just a concept that I came up with, and it seems like it works really well. So I think what I'll do from there is, I think after this video, I'm gonna, well, like I said, I might put some Seal on these rusty plugs just so I know they're gonna last wet. But actually that doesn't, it feels kind of oily, so I'm sure they're fine for another 200,000 miles. But yeah, but I think what I'm gonna do is epoxy this one on next. So get the duct tape. This is a little trickier to put into place, but as long as you put your duct tape on there, and like I said, this can be a little out. It's not like it has to be perfectly flush, as long as it's airtight. And then maybe in the next 24 hours or by tomorrow or Friday, I'll get out the welder and start, like I said, like making stitches. And then I'll decide if, you know, if it ends up being too hot for this, because I don't really think you can run a line. Like, it would probably be too warm. But worst case scenario, this ends up being stitch welds, like you're doing sheet metal, and then I'll cover that with epoxy, and I'm sure it'll be fine. So anyway, till next time.